Hello, everybody. Welcome to the I've Been Thinking podcast, where everyday thoughts lead to extraordinary conversations. I'm super grateful to be joined by my fantastic co host, Mike. How are you today?
Howdy, partner.
Hello, Mike. We also have an incredible guest joining us today, someone whose expertise and insights are going to take our conversation to the next level, Mr. Jordan Woo!
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Well, today we have asked Jordan to come up with a topic to bring on, and so Jordan, I will let you introduce the topic today.
Yeah, it's kind of like up to interpretation, I guess. But like, so it's open ended. I don't want to be like, oh, I'm here bringing a topic. And here's like my definitive thoughts on it, right? So it's just kind of like a conversation started. But I saw this video the other day, and this guy. I think he was like one of those guys who's like super successful at like a really young age, like, you know, millionaire by 20 or whatever. And he was talking about like, you know, once he was like the dog chasing the car and caught up to it, it just kind of felt empty. And the way he described, you know, that feeling of emptiness was, you know, he was chasing insecurity versus, you know, chasing true ambition. And so that phrase just kind of stuck in my mind. And so I've been thinking about like, you know, what does it mean to do that? Like, you know, examples and like, you know, how that affects the way you, because, you know, like in your, like when you're young, you know, I don't want to say you're like always chasing something, but like, you know, you're going out into the world and like discovering it for yourself, and eventually you have to find something to like latch onto, and, you know, goals and whatnot. So, and so much in that pursuit, I think people decide to, you know, make something their North Star for the wrong reason. And so I just thought it was an interesting thought. And so I guess with that, I don't know, did one of you want to like if you just hear that statement, like what is the first thing that pops to your mind?
Yeah, at least for me, Jordan, I'm curious, and Mike, feel free to chime in too. I'm wondering what your definition of ambition is like, for you, and also like what does insecurity mean? Like, I think we should define both of those.
Okay, yeah. Let me think of an example. Yeah, I was about to write stuff down before this, but I forgot. But
That's okay.
I had a really good example. Okay, so this is not like, where I know this is like a composite of like people I know, and so I don't want to like call out a specific story, but I do know sometimes people will like plan trips like just for the sake of like going somewhere and like having something to show, because they know like their friends are going on like really cool trips, right? And so you're having a conversation with them, and you're like, oh, like, where are you going? And they'll be like, oh, I have no idea, like where would be cool? And then you're in your back of your mind, right, you're like, this is the backwards way to go about it, right? It's like you're letting your insecurity that you're not, you know, going on as many trips as your friends are dictate, you know, the trip, rather than like, oh, I actually really want to see Italy, or I really want to see Japan, right? And so that's like kind of the I think a backwards way of going about it. Same thing about like I think a lot of times like the statement where it's like, oh, like a guy's like trying to get into like the dating scene, right? And it's like, oh, like what do women like, right? And then he hears like, oh, women are like into adventure, or like something like that, right? And so he like goes and like picks up a hobby, like he like goes and like learns ceramics, right? Not for the fact that he loves ceramics, but because he like wants to like impress a woman, right? And so I think like that's kind of the vibe I'm going for. It's like, you know, like how do you decide like whatever you're pursuing, that you're doing it for, you know, the ambition of it, and not to cover up, you know, what you feel like you don't have.
Yeah, I've never heard somebody say chase insecurity before. Never heard that phrase, so I didn't quite know what you meant, but I see what you're saying now, like acting out of insecurity. That's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the way I think about that is chasing ambition is personal desires, and you have some sort of like sense of purpose, and chasing insecurities is some sort of external validation, some sort of you need to prove to yourself based off of some sort of fear of that could be failure, or fear of people like viewing you in some way. So it can almost be seen as like this external thing of what people view you as versus this internal thing of like maybe what you actually aspire to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. Like I guess my question would be like, how do you, right? If you're trying to like do like true reflection and ask yourself honestly, like, am I doing this for the right reason? Like, what's your litmus test to like feel like, am I doing this out of insecurity or am I doing it out of ambition? So like, how would you answer that?
So I think I don't think there's one way or the other. Like I don't think you should have 100% one way or the other. So the reason I say that is because I'm not saying chasing ambition is bad. I definitely think that there's a really good balance you could strike with it. But if you're trying to say that for chasing ambition, how do we get 100% of that versus feeling some sort of pursuit of something that is ultimately what someone else thinks of you? Like that's kind of what you're driving for. Like that could be really toxic. But for ambition, like if you don't have this balance of like having ambition versus, and I don't know what this third thing we might want to call, but like people burn out. Like you can still chase ambition and you can still burn out and you can neglect a lot of your important relationships that you have in life. So I feel like you have to also like understand that there's like that balance of that. I don't know if that answers your question, Jordan. So I'm gonna actually pass it on to Mike.
Okay, no, I like that idea though. Uh-huh.
Honestly, I've just been thinking about how terrible it would be if you thought you were chasing something you wanted, but you just spent your whole life doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like that's the reason why a lot of people like live in denial, right? Because that exact like horrible feeling, right,
Well,
is like
imagine living that way for 10 years and then like starting to get like the inklings that, oh wow, I've never really done anything because I cared about it. It's just what everybody else seems to care about. Think about how hard it is to change course, right? How difficult would that be? To actually look yourself in the eyes and go like, oh, I've been fake for so long. How do I even start figuring out what I am deep down, right? That sounds horrible.
no, it's unfathomable.
That sounds like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But I think it's super common though.
I don't disagree.
Like,
Yeah.
I think that there could be a layer. Like I don't know if you realize that. Hey, all of a sudden that
So
I've been
what do you
doing
do?
stuff.
Like that's the question. If you find yourself and you're chasing like this guy, right? Your example, you're chasing this insecurity, and you start to realize that that's what you're doing. What in the world are you supposed to do?
I think you need to reflect on values. Like, what do you value?
Yeah, so I thought about this a little bit, and I think one litmus test, I guess for me would be, do I enjoy what I'm doing, and I think in that way too, right? Like I think what you said before, like the lines blur a little bit more, right? It's like you might want to start going to the gym because you're like insecure about being like skinny and scrawny and not as big as the other guys. But then you like legitimately like fall in love with the process, the endorphins from the exercise, the ability to set a goal and go towards it. And so I think it can transform in a way. So it doesn't have to be black and white, like, oh my God, I've been going to the gym and I fucking hated it for the last 10 years and I'm jacked and I don't know what to do now, right? So I think there can be like positive transformations, but I do agree that like, yeah, a lot of times it's not uncommon that people go really far and realize that they haven't been doing something they truly love, for sure. Yeah, so I think but like I think there's almost a positivity in it too, where it's like if you're going to like switch from doing something out of insecurity, right? I think it's always because it like really just doesn't feel good, right? Like if you're like always chasing something because of lack, right? You're never gonna find fulfillment, right? It's that idea, right? You can get like more like why do like celebrities go and get ridiculous amounts of like plastic surgery, right? And you're like, oh, they're already attractive, right? And they get some plastic surgery, they're even more attractive, right? But the bar never ends, and so that's why like when chasing insecurity, I think it could be really nice to like pull yourself out of the hole, because then you go into a place where you can like enjoy things, I think. But yeah, I'll just say I think like again to answer the question like what is the litmus test, right? I think enjoyment is one of them.
And you're saying if you enjoy it, then that makes something not just an insecurity. Like if you're truly enjoying it, then you're not doing it just out of insecurity.
Yeah, like if you're doing it, I think that's a sign you're doing it for the right reasons. I think, yeah. If you guys disagree, feel free. Yeah, like, I haven't thought about it that much.
Yeah, I think there's levels to it. Maybe there's, and I feel like we talked about this on previous discussion, Brian. But the idea of
Yeah, was it your like validation podcast?
maybe,
I saw bits and pieces of that. Yeah.
yeah, but the idea of there's what do I enjoy? What do I like? What am I drawn to? Then I also think that an important part of yourself is what is good. That's at least how I see it. I think that there is the aspect of what do I personally gravitate towards, but then there's what is like true about me in general.
Mm-hmm.
And like we were talking before the pod about like helping others and helping that in your life. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things like that. They're external to your maybe your aptitudes or what you enjoy that can be really deep parts of your identity.
I also, it just makes sense.
I kind of get that. Ryan, sorry, do you want to say something, Ryan?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it's sometimes hard to uncover some of those things that maybe get you super energized, because the people you surround yourself with sometimes reflect these values, and if there's enough people around you, you start to say, hey, like, is this a value that I actually like uphold to too? Like, a random example that I was talking with someone else about is if everybody around you, no matter what age you are, starts getting married, then it's like, well, if you're not married, like, all of a sudden is that going to start throwing stuff of like, hey, should I get married? Like, is that something that like I value, like, as something that I should rush, even if I've been with someone for a long time or a short period of time? And I think that can start skewing some of the ways that you view life, and you might assume like some of these values are stuff that you think are right, but I'm curious of like, how do you put that boundary up and say, okay, these external forces maybe are what drive me the way I think, but like, how do you turn that off?
Yeah, so on Sundays I help out with the youth group, some middle schoolers at church, and all the middle schoolers are out there on their own, separate from the rest of the church. My buddy Riley's the leader, and he always gets a message at small groups and stuff. And so I hang out with like 13-year-olds on Sundays, and we have deep conversations just like this. And the topic, the sermon, yesterday, on Sunday, and the next couple weeks about comparison. And the idea is just that you're a middle school kid, and the temptation to just compare yourself to everybody else, and how bad that can be for you, right? Because if I compare myself to someone better than me, well, then I'm deflated and I hate myself because I'm not as pretty as they are, whatever. Can't run as fast. Then compare yourself to somebody that can do better than them. Then you've got this inflated ego and turn to a little prick because you think you're all cool, you know?
Yeah.
And so, this idea that comparison is this horrible, like, cancerous thing that just kind of ruins your life. I think that has a lot to do with the idea of insecurity, right? We're comparing ourselves to other people.
No, I think that I was exactly about to segue into that, Mike. I think like what's the saying? It's like comparison is the thief of joy.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think that's.
I would question that.
You would, okay, all right. Let's hear your thoughts.
I would question that because a lot of people, and for the most part, I would agree. If you look at your life and you try to take out all the ways you compare with people, whether that's looking at Instagram, whether it's the friends that you have, whether it's the people that you work with, and you say, okay, let me stop comparing myself, let me just go in my own zone. Like, you might have a way more relaxed day-to-day basis. You might. But then you look at people that inspire you, and you say, oh, I love what they do. Like, I wish I could be doing more. Maybe this person is giving millions of dollars away in donations. To me, like, that's super exhilarating. And I am comparing, I don't know if I'm, and yeah, I think I am comparing myself, because it's like, I wish I could be doing something like that. And it says, okay, like, what do I do today to get me a step further into that direction? And then I think comparison's super healthy.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's like a very valid nuance. Yeah, for sure. Where it's like inspiration is, at its root comparison, right? But like inspiration is, you wouldn't say, the root of all evil. Um, So that's a really good point.
My question though is maybe it's good to be inspired by people. I think it's definitely good to grow, become more than what you are right now. But the question is, how do you become who you are? Right, that's what we're talking about. How do you not chase insecurity? And how do you instead, your idea was ambition. That's something that's coming from within inside me, that is true to who I am. It's the thing I'm following, that it's based on my identity. And my argument would just be that, how do you expect to find that by comparing with other people? Like, you could be inspired by it, right? It might push you forward, but I'm just saying maybe it doesn't tell you who you are, who you're supposed to be.
I'm gonna go on like an interesting tangent, I think.
We'll see.
So Conan O'Brien, the comedian. I promise this is related. I promise this is related.
Let's go.
Yeah. So he has this graduation speech at I think it's like Dartmouth or something. You can look it up on YouTube. And like it's like an hour long, and like 55 minutes of it are complete garbage. Well, not garbage, but like it's just him like making like dumb jokes. But like he literally goes up on a commencement stage for like these incredibly intelligent people and just like makes the dumbest jokes for 55 minutes straight. But then in this like 5-minute segment, he like drops, I think, like incredible wisdom. And so it's that, in the 1950s, there was like this one stand-up like late night comedian. He was like the guy, right? And so every single like one, and then the generation after him, like the 60s comedians, all adored this guy. They all reflected his like talking voice, right? His sense of humor, right? They wanted to be him. So, and then they tried to do their best, right? And then when the 60s came around and like it was their generation, right? None of them quite got it, right? But in their own way, they were still, very entertaining, the most successful of their generation, right? And then, take them the best one out of the 60s generation, the 70s generation looked up to them and wanted to be them, right? And go on and so forth and so forth. And until you get to him and he talks about his role model and how he could never quite get his cadence or his, delivery or his charisma, right? But Conan is still seen as like, widely successful and inspiration, right? And so his sort of, grand metaphor conclusion was that your failure to become your role models will ultimately define you, I think. And so I think it is cool that they to have inspiration, right? So like to see these people who reflect parts of you, but to understand that like ultimately you cannot be them because you are not them, but in that chase you will find yourself. So it's a very like I guess convoluted way of saying like shoot for the stars or shoot for the moon, you'll land among the stars, right?
Right.
But yeah, I thought that was like really cool, especially because it's like you just don't expect this like nugget of wisdom, and I think he goes back to like telling stupid jokes right afterwards. But I would highly recommend the YouTube video. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a good point in there that it sounds like when we described it, he was trying to be whoever it is, comparing himself to that person, trying to become that person.
Yeah.
Then he realizes, I can't become that person. The comparison is not useful, but there was something good in that person. That's how I would. That's how I would see that. It's not that. What did I say? It was that he was inspired by something, the good in something, right? Not the comparison. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I see this being inspired by as like a fuel to get to your ambition. So if you look at like motivational speakers, you listening every day to motivational speakers, is not going to get you closer to your ambition, in my opinion. Like clearly, like you have to take action. But I think to get to this place of, hey, I'm chasing my ambition, I think a big part of that is just getting derailed. It's the same thing with habits. Like you want to form these habits, but they just don't happen. And so to me, looking at people, the right people, and doing this sort of comparison, whether it's like looking at getting motivated in some way, is the fuel that allows you to get on there. I don't think it's the end all be all like you were saying, Mike. That's how I view it.
I think we're getting into like semantics too, right? It's like, you know, this is technically comparison, this is technically comparison, but like at the end of the day, I think they're two different concepts, right? Even if we use the same word to describe both, right? Like it's not the same to look up at someone, and because I think when you're getting inspired, right, by like that guy who like donated $1 million, right? You're not in a competition to donate more money than him, right? You're looking at a specific, you know, his generosity, and you're seeing like, oh, I want to reflect part of that from myself. And so, you know, I think that's separate than like if you were legitimately trying to like donate more money than him for the sake of like competition, for the sake of insecurity, right? And so yeah, again, I think we're, you know, kind of getting in the words here, in the weeds, but like, you know, they're both comparison, but they're very different ideas, I think. And definitely one's good and one's not.
So we could stay on ambition. I don't know. To me, like, I'm actually more curious about insecurity than ambition. So we could stay on the topic of ambition if you guys want.
Okay.
But Mike, what are your thoughts on switching over to insecurity? Unless you have something to add to ambition.
Do it.
Okay. So if we're clearly insecurity is a bad thing. Maybe you guys can disagree, or we can find some loophole to make it that we disagree. Jordan, you got something?
I think it's inherently human, and I know it's probably has like negative connotations. I think it's what you do with it, but like, yeah, continue. Yeah, I don't think it's inherently all bad, but like, yeah.
Okay, that's fair. I think I mean, it is. I think it's natural for us to have insecurity, but I'm wondering, like, there's certain forms of insecurity that limit us from our ambitions, and we can probably recognize them and call them out. But I'm wondering, like, why don't we take bigger steps, like more proactive steps around that?
Okay, so you're asking, why do we let, our insecurities prevent us from chasing our ambitions sometimes?
Or like even the other way around, like whatever we're chasing, we might call it ambitions, but they're out of insecurities. Like if we can call them out on this call, we can probably each take a couple of minutes and spill out some stuff of insecurities of maybe what we're doing on a daily basis. Like we can probably prevent some of those things. Why don't we?
Okay. So you're saying we can recognize insecurity, and so right, if it's a bad thing, why not, you know, root it out?
Well, like not altogether, but like, yeah, basically what you're saying. Like, there's no way we can always get rid of insecurity, but we can probably remove some of it. Like, why don't we?
It's okay. Okay, I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here, actually. So, okay. Let me think for a second, and I'll give you an answer. Mike, if you want to go in the meantime.
Ryan, you're just saying why be insecure.
Yeah, like.
Good point. I like it.
I think it's not like we are going to be insecure, and I understand that. Like it's going to happen, but when we recognize it and call it out, why do we have to be as insecure as like we think we are? Like there's always going to be something there, but like we can mitigate a lot of it.
How do you mitigate it? You're saying that like it's obvious.
Okay, so let's just say that you take someone that is super stressed out, because I'm trying to think of a good example. If you take someone that posts a TikTok, how about let's just go with the TikTok example. I post a TikTok, my name's maybe on it, my first name, and I throw it out to the world, and all of a sudden I'm getting tons and tons of heat for it, of like you should go die, this was a terrible TikTok, like what's wrong with you? And in my mind, like I'm going to feel really crappy that day. Like it's probably like people are throwing all this stuff at me, and I'm taking all this external stuff that people are saying, and I'm letting it get to me. But like, why? Like I'm not going to meet these people. They're never going to see me. Like, so I can tell you the insecurity right there. I can recognize it, but why can't I control it?
Okay, I think. You mind if I chime in here real quick?
Go for it.
I think the illusion sometimes is that, like, you know, that there's two ways to get out of insecurity, right? Either acceptance or achievement. And so, right, it's like either, right, if I'm skinny, right, and that makes me insecure, I can either, get over it, or I can like get big, right? But I think, and like I think achievement only masks the insecurity, I think, right? Because then again, it's like the cosmetic surgery like example I gave earlier, right? You can always get bigger, you can always see the bigger guys in the gym, right? It'll never be enough. And so you can't truly say that like achievement can be like your antidote to insecurity. And so I guess back to answer your question, like why can't you just get over it? I think it's a lot harder. Even like I think there's obviously there's more than one step to like overcoming insecurity. And I think the first step is even just like understanding it. A lot of people don't really, like internalize it to themselves, right? Like they'll just be insecure but not know it, right? And they'll like unknowingly like be, I don't know, doing all sorts of things like take like an example of like a teenager who like was never popular and like really wants to fit in, right? And now you're all of a sudden you're like drinking more than you should, taking like more drugs than you should, you're engaging in like risky behavior, right? And the entire time they're not thinking to themselves, oh wow, I'm so insecure because I'm not popular, right? But they know there's like they feel this lack, and they pursue things that they think will overcome that gap, right? Without ever stopping to think, why am I doing this? And I think that comes back to like again like the idea of like insecurity versus ambition. I think insecurity's biggest, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a word, like sin to us almost is like the fact that it's sneaky, right? You don't. I think once you realize like something is an insecurity, I think that's almost maybe the biggest step to overcoming it. But a lot of times people don't, right? And so it just sort of it lingers as a feeling instead of an idea in people's heads. But yeah, sorry, that was a long segment.
You said it might almost be a sin. And I think I agree that would be precisely what I call it, which would be like missing the mark. What that means, being sinful, is that you live in a way that misses the mark of reality. And so yeah, if you're comparing yourself all the time, and you don't have security in your own identity, I do think that is fundamentally missing the mark of like what life is, or like who you are. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think that we're created to be insecure. So I think it would be a simple way of living.
Yeah, and I almost feel bad to like sort of like put it on the insecure person to like blame them for the insecurity, and that's not what I'm trying to do. Yeah,
it's not a shameful thing. It's just like, is the purpose like were we created to be in this state of comparing ourselves to others and either feeling lesser than somebody or feeling better than somebody? Like that's not. I think that is. Yeah, I think that's a way of living that is corrosive to us, right? And that's what sin means. It's a brokenness in your action that's outside of what was intended, right? So
yeah, I think about sometimes, and obviously I'm not like a evolutionary scientist or something, but I like you think like why does insecurity exist, right? Like why, like from like a like evolutionary point, like why would it? And I think it could be like an incredible motivator sometimes, right? Like people will do all these things, right? Like it'll like light a fire under their ass to like do like to take action, to do all these things, and they just don't realize it's like not the correct action, but it is action. And I think that's why like in the animal sort of brain, right? Like it does drive us forward in a way. It just might not be in the right direction.
When you say it's not the right action, speaking of insecurity, I think what do you mean by that?
Like I think anything that like again like thinking from like the evolutionary point, like I think it exists to it exists because it drove anything in our brains that like drove us to take action to like rather than just like sit and die, right? I think that's why it exists. but yeah, it's not necessarily like the correct action. I guess I'm I guess struggling to explain what I'm thinking here.
It's a complex thing to talk about. Like it's not
Yeah.
there's not like a right like, there's not like a path forward in any means. Like it's like like we know we're not supposed to do it. We have these feelings. Like Jordan, you mentioned like the first stage is trying to accept it, but like it's fucking hard. Like just because you could like you could see something, recognize it, and maybe accept it doesn't mean you can do anything with it. Like it's really tough. And I think, I mean, me and Mike have talked about it on the podcast. Like you can have self reflection, you can meditate, you can pray, but that's I mean it takes years and years and years to practice that. So I think that my way, like a solution forward, is to try to be okay with who you are and try to be like present in the moment of like seeing like what do your actions actually carry out, like what are they actually doing to people in some way, to yourself, and just asking yourself like why did I do that, like was there a reason I did that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I think what I was trying to say, Mike, and I think this is maybe a better way to say it, it's like if we were to answer the question like why be insecure, right, from Ryan's, I think because it's so incredibly, like it's such a strong impulse, right? Like it will, for better or worse, like insecurity can take you very far in terms of like, guys can run that same rat race for 10 years before realizing, right? It's just that strong of like almost like a drug, right? Insecurity, that impulse to keep grabbing and clawing for what you don't have. And I think that's why it exists. Not because it's good, but because it's powerful. So I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I guess my question is, what is then the good thing, right? The answer what both of you were saying. You got insecurity, and maybe it's not what it should be. And then Ryan, you're talking about how do you overcome it, right? That's my question. What is the thing that makes somebody secure with people else, right? Or I don't know if there's a better word to think of it, but maybe integrated. I like that word. I've said that before.
I was gonna say, I feel like you've
Ryan,
loved that word, man.
Your answer was like, be okay with yourself.
Yeah, I think you have to be okay with yourself. If you look at TikTok and you see someone with this massive mansion, it's like you can easily say, "Oh, I wish I had that." And you look at your life, and maybe you have 2 beautiful kids, you have a great wife, you're healthy, you have a great family, and you kind of just come to listen. Like I love my life. This is like fantastic. Like if you want to compare stuff, compare to the people who are on the streets, who are poor, the people that have nothing to eat. Like if you're gonna start comparing stuff, like that's how I think you should compare it. Like you can always look at someone's always gonna be smarter than you. Like just like I'm not saying think of yourself as a dumbass, but like I feel like a lot of people always compare up, and maybe you should compare down every now and then. Like I know that I'm just saying like
I see what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
You're not entirely saying like you shit on poor people to get a
yeah, no, not at all. But like Jordan, like we've talked
like,
about
I think like appreciation is what you're saying, like appreciation, humility, like I think those are all.
Not only appreciating like what you have, but also like really valuing what you bring to the table in this world. Like everybody always says, like I have a meaning and a purpose, and it's sometimes you might know exactly what that is, and if you don't, that's okay. But you can at least give something back. You can say, listen, like I'm here for my friends in some way. Like I'm actually really good at writing and really good at playing the guitar. Like you bring something into this world that you have no idea what these other people actually bring. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things I think that do help, right? Like again, like appreciation, humility. I think the most important one is probably acceptance, and I think that's what you said earlier too. Another saying I like a lot is like acceptance.
Wait, George.
Oh,
what do you mean by acceptance for you though? I'm curious.
Like I think acceptance of like the reality that you'll never be as good as you want to, or like if you continue on just chasing what you don't have, right? There's always more to lack, right? The lack is infinite. And so, accepting that, you're dealt like the hand that you're dealt, right? You're born a certain way, and I think you have like, it's nice to push those limitations, but I think half of finding yourself is accepting limitations, right? And so, it's like half and half, right? You have to push as far as you can, but then understand where the road ends and be fine with that. And that's what acceptance is for me. I think again, sort of the delusion of insecurity is like I can get over it, right? If I'm good enough, if I excel enough, I can overcome it by being better. And I think the way to like think about it is think about an insecurity that you couldn't get better at, right? Like for example, if you're really short and you're insecure about that, right? You can never get taller, right? And so there's no like 30-minute grind you could do every single day to like gain like a quarter of an inch, right? Like there's just simply nothing you can do. And so right, so like the tempting avenue, right? Like getting over insecurity by excelling is your avenue is not there, and so you just have to accept it. And once you realize like that way of getting over insecurity for like the insecurities that you can't do anything about, works for that one, it works for all of them. Like acceptance is ultimately, I think, the antidote.
But like to me, and I agree. The only thing I'm wondering is like for me, and I know this is not like probably not what you mean, but like if I'm short and I'm like, okay, I accept it, I'm short. Like to me, like that would frustrate me. That would be like I don't take that as like, oh, I can't just accept that, which I know that's exactly the opposite of what you're saying. But I think if you accept that, because I agree, but you can take what you have and you put that forward in another way and say, okay, I'm short and I accept that, but because I'm short, I can do all these things that someone can't do that they're tall. So to me, it's like I never like to just accept something without putting another spin on it in some way, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because like everything you have is a disadvantage. I guarantee you can find a way that it's actually an advantage for you in some way.
And I would actually disagree. Well, okay, I think maybe the way you think about things is different than the way I do, right? But like if you're thinking about like what advantage do I have because I'm bad at something and therefore insecure, right? I think the insecurity exists because there's an asymmetry, right? Like it's always, maybe there's some advantages to being short, right? Maybe you like live a little longer, maybe you can fit smaller places, maybe you consume less food, right? But like, right, but like if you weigh the balances, right, like that, if you're very like, like piece by piece meal, like what do I get, right? The benefits of being on the other side, being tall, like far outweigh being small, right? So if you focus on like looking for like the crumbs, right, you're eventually going to go back to that comparison, I think. And so I don't think like looking for the maybe like it does it for you, right? But I feel like maybe looking for like the silver lining is not my preferred or the way I see getting over insecurity, right? Because again, if you're looking for like like what do I get from this, right? You're going to apply that same line of thinking to the other side and then realize there's a lack, and then you're back into that insecure loop.
Mike, what do you think on this?
I think what you just said at the end is where we kind of started, which is comparing either way doesn't really help you, right? Like Ryan, you're trying to tell us we should compare down so we can feel good about ourselves, but that doesn't do anything. We're still comparing, and we're just overinflated compared to the other person, right? And comparing up doesn't help because now you're demoralized and you don't think you're as good. So yeah, I think it is pretty much a cycle that you can't get out of. If you're going to compare yourself to other people and have that be where your identity sits, then there is no ground, right? There is no foundation that you're thinking about. You're just at the mercy of who you're comparing to. You're gonna have good days and bad days.
Yeah. Okay, and so okay, I wanna highlight something real quick. I know you have thoughts, so I just want to point this out again, right? And so we started the segment off by saying, why don't you just get over insecurity, right? And then we got to the point where like you realized that if you were frustrated about being insecure, that like you couldn't just accept it, right? That like there's frustration, there's pushback, right? And so now you kind of see why it's hard to just accept things, right? And I think, and I mean I don't want to say like my way is right and your way is wrong, right? But like I think you see like there's a lot of internal reflection and turmoil to get to the point where you can accept things, and that's the hard part of insecurity and the long part of insecurity.
That's fair. No, I love that actually. That was really well phrased. For me, when I say compare down, and one of you mentioned it, I think Jordan or Mike, but when does that compared down actually become a gratitude? Because that's more of what I'm referring to. So you're not actually doing this comparison, but you're being grateful. So like, there's a certain point where that comparison, in my mind at least, comes to gratitude. So I don't know if there's some middle ground there or not, but like when I say compared down, like that's essentially what I mean. Because
Yeah.
if you're grateful, like, and going back to Jordan, what we were talking about, like, there's this vicious cycle of, okay, I'm short, I hate myself because I can't do all these things. Okay, let me think about the silver linings. Oh, but then that actually I can't do that because I need to be tall, and it's this cycle. But as soon as you started being like, oh, like I'm just happy that I have two legs. I'm just happy, like, at some point it starts converting to, I don't know, this gratitude wave, and you're just riding that, and like you have probably a pretty pleasant life at that point. So when does that segue in?
I think you have to find a way to like find gratitude though. I feel like without comparison, I feel like if the only way you like love having two arms is by seeing somebody with no arms, like I feel like I don't know, is that true gratitude? I don't know, Mike, if you have thoughts.
No, that's a good point. Is it true gratitude if it's... Yeah, I think, I mean, we talked about this in the last podcast, that the idea of being okay on your own, we were talking about being alone, but it's the same idea that we're talking about. It's just not physically alone. It's like, if you didn't compare to anybody else, are you okay with what you see, right? Are you okay with who you are? That's who am I, right? That's the question. Fundamental question. Who am I, and am I okay with that? And
Yeah.
if
I
you're
think this is honestly a good like loop back around, right? So if we were to answer our original question, right? How do I know if I'm chasing ambition versus I'm chasing insecurity? And I think another good litmus test of that is like, would I still be doing this if nobody was watching? Would I be still doing this if I was the only person left? And so, I think, right, because in that world, there's zero comparison anymore, right? And there's only, pursuit of, I guess, who you're meant to be without any outside influence, I guess. So, I
the
thought,
problem is we don't live in that world.
yeah, it is.
So yeah,
But
it's
but you can still get to that place.
what
Like,
place?
there's a lot of people, the place of like, would I do this if nobody was looking? Like that mind shift is very common among a lot of people that in like certain religions, especially like I know that's a big practice for like monks. Like, that's kind of what they practice on like a day-to-day basis. It's like it doesn't really matter like if people are watching or not. Like, this is the way that I'm studying and practicing. And so like maybe it's not the world we live in, but you can still make that your reality.
Hmm. Yeah, I will say, yeah, like weirdly enough, right? People ask me like, when was the happiest you ever were, right? And like obviously I can pinpoint like times in my life for like short bursts, like where I was the happiest, right? Like falling in love or something like that. But like for an extended period of time, I actually think like the first couple months of COVID was like weirdly blissful to me because like I'm a person who I'm always in the thick of things, and right, you can't help but let comparison and insecurity and like ambition and pressure and all that get to you, and to just finally have a space where there's nothing expected of you, where for better or less you're alone in the world, right? And now you can just do whatever you just wanted to do. I think that was pure bliss in my opinion. And so like for an extended period of time, no pressure. And I don't know if like that's the best way to live, obviously, for like a long time, right? Like if you don't have pressure to improve, then you won't. But for just this short amount of time, like to take the entire world out of the equation was just so much purer, I think, at least for me.
Mike, I think I cut you off before. I'm not sure if you had something to add before.
Nope, not anymore.
Jordan just mic dropped. That's why.
Yeah, dude. Love it.
Well, okay, I'm trying to give you your mic drop because we're over time, so.
No. It was good. So okay, I guess Jordan, because you're the one that came with, and I mean you've been summing up things really elegantly in my opinion, like that litmus test and everything. So to answer your original question, like if we were to end on a note of like, how would you balance the two between chasing ambition versus insecurity? Like usually we like to have some practical tips that people can like go on their way
Sure,
with.
sure,
And I'm
sure.
curious of like, what have
Okay,
you taken away?
This is again all my personal take, and you know, and it's all my personal take as a snapshot of who I am right now. You know, like I might not agree with myself in 2 years, but I think it's fine to begin journeys on insecurity, right? Like I think it's ultimately human, right? Like you're gonna be in a world where, you know, you're compared to your siblings growing up, you're compared to your friends growing up, and then as your world only gets bigger and bigger, and the amount of comparisons only gets bigger and bigger, and the amount of free time to think about that only gets longer and longer, and you know you can't evade, like Mike said, the pressures of like the outside world, and so eventually, like inevitably, you'll start some journeys off due to insecurity, and I think that's fine, right? But along the way, I think you have to stop every once in a while. Like I think you have an obligation, right, to just stop every once in a while, because it's so easy to get caught up in like you know I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'll get it eventually, but you have to stop before you get there, and really think and reflect, like, am I doing this for the right reason, right? And so half the time, like I don't know what percentage of the time, right, you might have started this journey off of a lack, but then found like a joy to it that you never expected from yourself, right? You're like, oh, I wanted to, like, again, I'm always going back to this gym metaphor, right? But it's like, oh, I like just wanted to like not be skinny anymore, but now I realize, you know, I really enjoy this, or I'm really good at it, and like it's something that now you can incorporate into part of like, you know, your identity, and now that's good, and now you're pursuing it for the right reasons. And so that reflection is to make sure that, you know, whatever you're pursuing, it is for the right reasons, and then, you know, if it ends up right, I'm not doing this for the right reasons, I think you almost have to have the courage to stop. And I think that's the much harder part of the equation, right? Because like, and I say courage, right? And it sounds weird to be like, oh, like if you're doing something bad, just stop, obviously, right? But again, it's part of that, you know, like acceptance is just harder than you think sometimes, right? Because sometimes stopping means like giving up on your dream, like letting your dream die, right? And that's the reality. You know, sometimes things just aren't meant to be. And it takes people a very long time to realize that sometimes. You know, and you get into things like sunk costs, right? I've spent so much time and so much energy and so much headspace on this thing that I want desperately. But if it's not good for you, then you have to have the courage to say, I can't have it. So yeah, I think, you know, that mid-journey stop, and then, you know, being very honest and courageous with yourself, I think is ultimately, in my mind, the way forward.
Love that, man. That was beautiful. Mike, I'm gonna give you anything you want to add, or I want to give you a shot to speak anything before we end it.
Oh man, I liked it. Honesty and courage. Combination.
Honesty and courage. That's awesome. Well, appreciate you both coming on today, and hopefully our listeners took some value from what we said today. Thank
Cheers,
you, boys.
Man. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, man. Had a great time.
All right. Yeah. See you guys.